Hey, good afternoon, and welcome to the informational Zoom on our dredge project. I just want to say at the top that for us, the most important issue was that we were timely with having this public information session, as we're going to be submitting for permits next week. We wanted to make sure to notify our community with all this information prior to that time. But knowing that we are on a Saturday afternoon in summer, hopefully the recording will make it easy for people who have interest but weren't able to join today to view it at a later time. We will post it on our website with an easy to find link. And then we will also send reminders in upcoming e-newsletters and to our neighborhood networks as well. So with that, I'll pass it over to Dr. Danielle.
All right, thanks everybody. I'm sharing my screen now. Everybody see and hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. So as Kevin mentioned, this is our info session, public information session on the Teatown Lake Dredging Project. We've been working on site plans and planning for this for a couple of years now. Obviously, this is a long process we have to submit for permits. There's a lot that goes into it. So I'm going to go over from start to finish the history of the lake, all the way through where we are today with moving forward with the dredge project. So the history of Teatown Lake Dam was built across Bailey Brook in 1924 by Gerard Swope when they purchased the property, which created Teatown Lake. Here's an aerial image of the lake. I don't have a date on this, but it's at least 15, probably 20 years old at this point. In 1963, the Swope family's generous land gift of approximately 200 acres, including the lake, created Teatown Lake Reservation, which is we're aptly named for the lake, and that's because it was the heart of that initial land gift. We've continued to grow in both size and scope since that initial gift. We now comprise over 1,000 acres, and we have a lot of programming and stewardship that's happening on the preserve. We've made substantial investments in both the dam and the lake to protect its longevity. Lakes come with maintenance. They come with, a need to do management and to make sure they stay healthy for the future. In 2022, we did the extensive dam repair work at the dam interface, which included replacing this lower outlet valve. You can see here the original valve was still there when we pulled this out, so it dated to 1924. And this valve is actually really important for us being able to control the water level during high rainflow events. We need to be able to drain the lake should we expect a lot of rain to drain into it over a short period of time. And this work was critical to the safe operation of the dam, which is a Class B dam, which is regulated by New York State DEC. Class B dams are ranked as intermediate hazard dams. The rankings are A, B, or C. Croton Dam is a C, a high hazard dam. And then A is considered a low risk dam, right? There's no risk of catastrophic dam failure, flooding, or anything like that beyond the dam face, if the dam were to fail. So you can think of an intermediate risk dam as there is some potential infrastructure loss if it were to overtop or catastrophically fail. So DEC regulates this to make sure that people are safe and protected beyond the dam's outflow. This is an aerial overview of the Teatown Lake area, and you can see I have labeled here the dam, and this is actually, because they dammed Bailey Brook, I think it's important to understand the context from an aerial perspective of the Teatown Lake watershed. A watershed is just the total topography area that drains into a lake. And I have an image that shows the different land cover and how that's related to Teatown's boundary on the next slide. But Bailey Brook actually drains from Shadow Lake down to Vernay Lake, all the way into Teatown, and then it outflows into the Croton Reservoir. So you can see here that we have 3 lakes that have been dammed across Bailey Brook, and that creates Shadow, Vernay, and Teatown Lake, which are all under Teatown's purview. The Teatown Lake watershed, as I mentioned here, is the total land area that drains into the lake. So you can see it here around the outflow area. The green just represents forest or forest-like habitat. The red is development, and blue is obviously water, or wetlands is the light blue. And you can see Teatown's trail system overlaid on here, and our boundary actually is this dash line. And our watershed is actually only about a third owned by us. And so activities outside of the watershed affect what happens in the lake body. Teatown's lake is eutrophic and phosphorus limited, meaning that it has high nitrogen levels. And when we get influxes of phosphorus during rainflow events, so you get the watershed water washing in and adding phosphorus from, septic systems and fertilizers and all of those things, you end up with algal blooms or high plant biomass. We also have, I have a little graphic here that shows eutrophication and the feedback loop that actually happens inside of the lake. So you get this external nitrogen and phosphorus loading from that drainage from the watershed, which comes from both the stream, Bailey Brook, right, the lakes that run upstream down into Teatown Lake, and also from the surface water that runs from the watershed. That loading causes plant biomass to boom. And then you actually get internal loading when those plants die. So you can think of it as a feedback, right? As the plants die, they're releasing additional nutrients, and then that causes more plants to grow. And so this is why historically Teatown Lake has had an abundance of vegetation in it. You can see the water lilies on the surface, but actually most of our vegetation is submerged, meaning it's under the water surface, and you would only see it if you were out via boat or looking down into the water from the boardwalk. Teatown's lake ecology is, like I said, eutrophic and phosphorus limited, but we have seen a reduction in plant abundance since we had to do the dam repair work. When we drained the lake, that caused a dieback in the plant material. It will recover over time, but that work did not address the lake fill-in problem that we have. So dredging actually addresses sedimentation, which can be a product of eutrophication. When you get a lot of flows into the lake, you also get sediments with that. But we didn't address that with the dam repair. Lakes are natural low spots. So lake fill-in is a naturally occurring process, and it happens over the time span of centuries. This is an example of a lake right at formation, and then you see the sediments have deposited on the lake edge. This is what's happening to Teatown Lake on the edges, especially around Wildflower Island. And I'll give you some examples of that via aerial in just a minute. We've done our best to slow sedimentation to the best of our ability by putting in this wetland restoration project that was completed in 2020. We put in a catch basin, which you can't actually see, but it's just behind this pipe here. This is the nature center up the hill, and this addressed the erosion problems we were having and the sedimentation problems we were having from the parking lot. We get a lot of surface runoff from Spring Valley Road, and that was eroding the hillside and filling in the lake area below here. The catch basin we clean out, we take the sediment out of it. It catches the sediment before it reaches the lake on a usually annual, sometimes every 2 years basis. And then we also added hardscaping and a swale, so these plants will absorb and catch that sediment, and it will fall out before it reaches the lake as well. You can see the evidence of sedimentation most clearly around Wildflower Island. So this is a picture from 2016, and just 7 years later, looking at the same bridge, you can see just how much the area has filled in. And the aerial images I mentioned show this even more clearly. So this is an aerial image of Teatown Lake from 1947. I'm going to have you focus on the area around Wildflower Island in particular. You can see that as I move forward in these images, it's starting to get more shallow, which is evidenced by the brown color in the water. The deeper water is darker on the image. 2018, you see it's still sedimenting in around the island. And then by 2021, we're starting to see this full fill in. And this is accelerated pretty rapidly over the last 2 years, especially with the drought we had in last summer. And so things dried out a lot, and a lot of plants got established right around the island because of the low water levels. And this is what the area outside the wetland that we restored looks like today. This is looking out over Wildflower Island over here, and the Lakeside Trail is just to the right. This is the channel. During high water events, which we were having right now when we re-added our flashboard, there is a channel of open water that extends. It's about 20 to 25 feet through the thickest part of this, but it's not something that is consistently holding water. And that's because of the issues with the sedimentation. We had 2 private consultants that we worked with to give us lake management recommendations overall. So they looked at fish communities, they looked at the plant communities, they gave us information on the sedimentation rates. And both companies, Princeton Hydro and Solitude Lake Management, independently flagged dredging as an important part of maintaining the lake's longevity. So specifically, Princeton Hydro talked about how the abundance of accumulated sediments and the impaired conditions regarding the eutrophication and the plant growth we were having, that dredging would really be the warranted action here. And Solitude came back and said, you know, aside from lake-wide dredging, there's no quick fix to deal with this issue. So something we needed to recognize and move forward with, understanding how we were going to dredge, and what we were going to do and how we were going to permit that. The most urgent issues around the dredge are that open water is paramount to the protection of Wildflower Island. Wildflower Island is a home to, you know, over 240 species of wildflower, and I'll talk a little bit about some of those species in a minute. We view Teatown Lake as an asset. We're named after the lake, and its longevity does require us to dredge. We will not have a lake if we continue to let it fill in. It will transition to wetland over time, and that's an important part of our identity. As I mentioned, Wildflower Island is biodiverse. It has 240 plant species on it, and most of those are native. So we have 192 species that are native to New York, and then 21 of those are native to the United States. The island was viewed as kind of a living garden for a while, and so some species were brought and rescued from places where they were going to be paved over for a parking lot. And so you get some unique native plants that you would not find elsewhere, especially in Westchester County. We have 14 what we call non-native naturalized species. So those are species that were not in their native range. They're coming from another place, but they're not causing any issues on the island. And we only have 7 invasive species on the island. And that's because it's actively managed, it's isolated with water around it to protect it. And then we have 6 species with unknown status because they're potentially rare plants that have to be genetically sequenced to really know which species they are. An example of that is this yellow lady slipper. There's several species of them. There's a European species. We believe we have the rare species native to New York. But we wouldn't know that without genetic testing. So that is something that, you know, we could move forward with if we had funding and time for it. But in the short term, we do know that it's this biodiversity hotspot, and we really do need to do our best to protect it. On the invasive species front, if you step just outside of the island, the number of invasives you're going to find in terms of species doubles or triples, depending on which part of you are on the preserve. So this is really a low invasion area that we're going to maintain and work to keep as beautiful as it is. There are also some benefits to dredging beyond just protecting the island, although I'm going to add that point again at the end just to emphasize it, because that's really one of the focuses, is protecting that as Teatown's biodiverse asset. Dredging increases water depth and clarity, which is important for reducing gas exchange to the atmosphere. Lakes do release methane, and so that's an important thing to understand when we have low water systems that are going to be submitting greenhouse gases. It adds open water habitat for submerged aquatic plants. We used to have a rare, threatened, and endangered species, spiny hornwort, around the island. And it was only found there during that 2019 survey by Solitude Lake Management. But because there's been no water in that section, even before the dredge, the habitat was declining, and we lost that species. I went out and did another survey and could not find it this summer. We have it in other places on the preserve, in other lakes. And it's not threatened with extinction, but it is isolated to a few populations in Westchester. It also improves access for lake and invasive species management. One of the things that's really difficult about managing that area right now is that it's almost impossible to keep your footing, and you can't access it by boat because it's too shallow. And so when we do things like water chestnut pools from the lake to keep the invasives off the lake surface, and dealing with other issues with lake management, like taking water samples to understand if we're having issues with excess nutrients, that becomes infinitely more difficult when we don't have open water access. And it also protects the island, which I've already talked about extensively. The areas that we're talking about dredging are 2 zones, so mostly around the island, which I focused on, but also the area around the Bergman Boardwalk. If anybody's walked the Lakeside Trail during dry periods, when we're in a drought, you'll notice that the boardwalk is not actually floating on water, and it sits on floats. So for the longevity and limited, you know, we want to limit the maintenance of Bergman as much as we can. It's a big floating boardwalk that requires a lot of investment from us. We want to make sure it's functioning as designed, and it's designed to float on open water. So there's a small section here that's part of the dredge plan. There are 2 different types of dredging. There's a dry dredge where you come into an area that has completely converted to wetland. We're not there yet. And then there's a wet dredge, so which is a hydraulic dredge on top of water that basically vacuums up the sediments and then puts them into a settling basin. We're going to be doing a wet dredge, so a hydraulic dredge, and using discharge pipes and return water pipes to keep the water levels in the lake consistent over the course of the dredge. We will not need to drain the lake again to dredge it. This is something that we can do with water in the lake. And ideally you would do it at a high water event so that you could access as many areas as possible. We are not using a settling basin. We're actually using geotubes, which I'll talk about in just a moment. So the geotubes, these are geotextile sediment tubes, are basically giant filled bags that allow the sediment and water to come in via manifold and piping system, and they only let the water out. They don't let the sediment out. So you can think of it as shedding water over the course of the drying period. This water is then returned to the lake, usually cleaner than when it's pumped in. And it consolidates the sediments into usable fill after, pending you don't have any issues with, you know, harmful toxins or anything in your sediments. And the great news about Teatown sediments is we already did a sediment test of our lake sediments, and they are clean. They are certified clean fill. We have a letter from the DEC that says that they can be used anywhere without restriction. So this gives us the incentive to use these sediments for projects, habitat restoration projects, and other uses across the preserve. The benefits of geotubes are that they produce less disturbance, right? So all you have to do is make sure they're level, and then you pump them into the bag, and then you can regrade after they dry, and keep them where they are. You don't have to have, you know, a pit you're digging, right, to settle the sediments out. So it's much less disturbance. You have confined dewatering, so you can control where the water flows go. The filtered return water is really important because we drain into the Croton Reservoir, and DEP is really concerned about everything that drains into the Croton Reservoir, rightfully so, because it provides New York City's drinking water, and we need to make sure that we are returning water that is cleaner than what we took out. The drying time is much less weather dependent because those tubes, again, let water out but not in. So if it rains, it's not going to hurt you in reducing the drying or in lengthening the drying time for the sediments. And it produces this clean fill, as I mentioned, which can be used in other projects across the preserve. So I mentioned this already, but DEC and the DEP requires the return water to the lake to be as clean as possible because we are in the Croton Reservoir watershed. The geotubes let that water out, but leave the sediments in, which actually reduces the amount of suspended sediments that are inside of the return water. So I'm going to actually show you a video of how these tubes work. So this is a slowed down video. You can see the tube shedding water, and then this water is in a catch basin that is then piped back into the water body that it came out of. And this means that the water level, again, stays consistent. We don't have to drain it when we're doing the dredge. The Geotube locations, there are 2 places where we're planning to put these tubes. The first site is the lower lakeside parking lot, or the Blinn Road lot, as most people refer to it. And the other site is the uphill Hidden Valley Meadow site. These are the rough engineering plans. I don't have the full plan on the screen because they don't fit, but this is final. It just doesn't have all the legends and keys on it, but I can orient everyone. So this is Blinn Road here. There is going to be an access road around the outside of this geotube section. and this is the septic field, the meadow that you guys see when you come in and park. And this is going to be maintained just for emergency access for us and maintenance access for us. This will not be drivable. It's not drivable right now for folks who want to access the lakeside trail. You park and then you walk in. The tubes themselves are going to be layered on top of each other 3 high. So there's a tube here at the bottom that is the longest tube. It's about 200 feet long, or actually, no, that's incorrect. It's 350 feet long. And then they get progressively smaller as you were to stack them. The area will also be given a fence so that during drying, nobody's climbing on or having access to these tubes. That's an important part for safety and making sure that the area stays undisturbed. And then we also have the return water pipes labeled here along this, the pumping water and the return water pipes labeled here. So the water is going to drain down, go back to the lake. And then there's additional piping that will go across Blinn Road to go to the uphill meadow site, which I'll talk about on the next slide. But this will involve a road cut on Blinn Road for the time of the dredge, which is about 6 weeks, which then will be repaired back to its original state after the dredge. The road will still be passable during the dredge. The area that will be impacted is going to be this lower parking lot, which will be closed. The other area is the uphill Hidden Valley meadow section, which here are the pipes that are coming in across the road. If you know Teatown, this is the trail that runs up Hidden Valley into the open meadow before you transition back to forest to the loop. Up here is the top of the loop. So we have 4 tubes stacked here that are the site will have to be prepared and graded appropriately for the tubes. It'll have to be terraced. But the plan for this site actually is to use the fill material after it is dried for a habitat restoration project for the meadow. Right now, this uphill site does not have very good plant biodiversity. It's mostly invaded by Japanese silkgrass and some invasive shrubs. Our plan is to do a reseeding and regrading with this fill, which is going to be really high in nutrition. And really good seed bank starter for native plants. So we're going to transition this back to a higher quality meadow than it was when we started. The drying time for these tubes is really long. So it takes about 6 to 12 months of drying based on our sediment analysis that we did, but the drying speed isn't linear. So most of the dewatering in these tubes occurs for the first 3 to 4 months, and then you get smaller additional drops in water content over the remaining drying time. It's a 6 to 12 month estimate. You can always open the tubes earlier and use the material. They just are a little heavier once you get past that 3 to 4 month initial drying period. So we're not married to, we have to wait 6 months or we have to wait 12 months. We have some flexibility with opening the tubes once that initial drying time has commenced. And then the implications for this. So I've talked a lot about the plans and what we're doing. And really what I wanted to focus on for this presentation is both the background of the lake, the general plans, and then some implications of that for the neighborhood and also visitors. So the Blinn Road lot will be closed for the duration of staging, drying, and regrading. That's going to take anywhere from 8 to 14 months, depending on, again, that drying time that I mentioned. The Hidden Valley Trail will be rerouted around that upland meadow drying site, and I'll show you a map of where that's going to go. It's not going to impact hiking the Hidden Valley Trail. It's just a short reroute around that area, but we want to keep visitors off of the geotubes and away from the drying site. There will be that temporary road cut and plates over Blinn Road for the duration of the dredge. That's about 6 weeks. And then the road will be restored. Our plan right now, hopefully, is to create some type of wildlife crossing underneath the road with a culvert instead of a closed road as we have now. There's some folks at DEC that have had some success with that. And so we're talking about it, but we haven't finalized any plans for that. But that would be a habitat improvement for crossing over the road compared to what is there now. Temporary reroutes around the lakeside loop will be inevitable for the duration of the dredge. These will be, again, temporary in nature. They're not going to be consistently closing one section of the trail for the duration of the dredge. It's likely to move around depending on where the unit is and how the timing of it works out. So if it's a slow season, we may not need to be as aggressive with closures. like if it's, closer to early spring versus if we're doing this, a little bit later in May or something like that. We also will have to have some temporary single lane traffic for loading and unloading the dredge unit on Spring Valley Road. That's only going to affect the loading and unloading, which is a maximum of 2 days, but it is something that will be a bit disruptive. So this is the trail reroute for Hidden Valley. You can see here's Teatown's trail boundary. Right here's the lower parking lot that I mentioned. I want to say that temporarily this section will be closed during staging while people are in and out. We'll reroute folks around the Three Lakes Loop. But once the area is done being staged and the tubes are filled, we will reopen this section. So access to the Three Lakes Loop and access to Hidden Valley will remain unchanged. You'll cross the road and then there's a small old trail and road bed that actually connects up to the north section of our property boundary, and then we'll jump over to the Hidden Valley Loop. So just a short detour through the woods rather than through the meadow. And then the plan, as I mentioned, is to restore this and reopen the trail to its original location once the drying and habitat improvements are complete. Some other considerations are noise. So this is a noise assessment that was done by Tim Judge of Eco Assessments LLC, who's helping us through permitting. And I want to show, these are 3 fixed points, but I want to emphasize that the dredge unit moves, right? It's a boat, it's on the water, it goes across the water. So it's not like the noise levels at any of these 1 locations will be constant over the entire 6 weeks. It's likely that the dredge time for the Bergman Boardwalk will only be about a week and a half, and then we'll move over to the island. So it'll be very temporary in nature. But the important thing to note is that at 200 feet, which is the area that goes out to any adjacent houses or roadways, for the most part, are similar to what you would get with passing traffic. So the noise levels at 200 feet away from the dredge unit itself are 66 decibels, whereas a passing car at the side of the road is around 64 decibels. So it's going to be like traffic noise, but again, this is going to move across the lake, and it's not going to be consistent noise for the entire duration of the dredge in every location. The other thing that we're doing is we will install temporary power at the Glen Road site to limit the use of generators, so we don't have to do that, and that will keep noise to a minimum as well. The other consideration is there are 9 trees at the uphill Hidden Valley Meadow site that will have to be removed to regrade this site for the geotubes. Only 2 of those are in decent condition. Their crown diebacks are less than 15%. The rest of the tree canopies are either 25% or more have dieback. So that's, these are big, most of these are big mature trees, but they're definitely stressed and not doing well at this site. And so, this is the site to minimize tree loss. If we were to try to put this material anywhere else, it would involve a lot more clearing than what we're doing here with the 9 trees. The remaining schedule is we're planning to submit for permits probably next week or early the following week to both the Army Corps, or to actually there's several agencies. There's the Army Corps of Engineers and DEC. That'll be a joint permit. The town of Yorktown will have to submit to as well, and we'll have to submit to DEP. And that's because we're in that Croton Reservoir watershed. There's lots of permitting. There will be public hearings, of course, for the town of Yorktown, and we will be responding to application follow-ups and permitting agencies and attending town meetings as we are required, including that public hearing, probably in the, late parts of the winter of this year into early next year. And then once our permits are issued, they'll be good for 5 years. And so we can decide the timing of the dredge based on when we think the sediment would be most likely to be used on site. This is not something that we would do immediately after getting the permits. It would involve some planning with contractors, probably take about 3 to 4 weeks for us to get the contractors on site. The implementation details. So once those permits are received, and really that's at the discretion of DEC how quickly they issue those, we will have 2 to 4 weeks of site prep, which will be regrading and staging for the actual dredge itself, 6 weeks of the active dredge, and that'll be on the water. Then that 6 to 12 months of drying time in the geotubes, and then about 4 to 6 weeks to relocate that dry usable material and restore the parking lot. So this is I would say, a timeline to kind of get you used to what the timeline might be. If we did a 6-month dry and we received our permits early next year, it may be that this is pushed out if we don't get our permits, say, until May, right? And so that would obviously delay things by a few months, but it just gives a little bit of context for what this looks like on a month-to-month scale. So in March of 2024, we would do our site prep if we got our permits January to February. April to May next year, we would dredge, and then that would restore that lake depth. We're looking to dredge to a depth of about 3 feet around the island. Right now, the water levels are about 6 inches around the island in the shallowest section. So that's a significant amount of material we are removing. It actually adds up to about 7,500 cubic yards. And then in November, we would cut open those tubes and move that material off-site if we were gonna, use it for something else on the preserve, or use it for that habitat restoration project, as I mentioned, and then we would restore the parking lot after the material was removed. If we did a 12-month dry, all this does is push out the parking lot restoration 6 months. So we would still do the March site prep, April to May dredge, May take the material off site, and then June the parking lot would be restored. The good idea with these types of volumes of material we're talking about is to make sure that when you're ready to cut the tubes open, you use the material. You don't want it sitting unused. It's safe and fine inside the tube. It's not eroding, causing any issues, but you don't want it to be cut open and sitting and then colonized by all kinds of invasives before it's moved to where it needs to go. All right, so that's all I have for the presentation, and I'm going to open it up for questions and discussion.
Question.
Yes.
What happens to the animals that are in the lake presently? The fish, salamanders, snakes, snails, whatever.
So because we're using the hydraulic dredge, it's a slow moving unit. So they should be able to move out of the way as it moves through. There will be some, disruption to the habitat, obviously. And anything you do lake management wise could be disruptive to wildlife, but it won't be as disruptive as when we drain the lake.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I had a question.
Yes.
Actually, the question before had one, but the main one I'm thinking is when it is time to start replanting the meadow after all this is done, will there be volunteer opportunities? I'm a teacher in Irvington, so if I want to have an extra credit assignment and have students help out planting things, or would that be a possibility, or is that something you guys want to keep just in-house?
The answer to that question for volunteer opportunities is always, regardless of what we're doing. So Alex, if you want to reach out to me via email and you want to we're doing habitat improvement projects all the time. We actually have a wetland we're restoring this coming fall. So contact me. That will definitely be an opportunity.
Okay, cool. The second, I just realized my camera wasn't on.
Okay.
The second question I had was on the other one is, just because I remember from when, because I was at Pace University when they did their dredging at their lake, is there a plan in place if something, because they didn't do the tubes, they did just an open fill at a pasture at the nature center they had there. Is there a plan in place if something gets unfortunately sucked up, or is the system designed to keep that from happening? We had turtles crawling out of the mud for a while, so I was just curious.
Yeah, so the tube itself is small, that they're actually going to be using the unit, and we're going to time this so that things are not buried in the sediment as we're the turtles should be awake and out and away so they can escape the unit as it moves. The timing of this ecologically is really important. It's as important as making sure that the sediment can be used when it's ready to be dried. So DEC is going to consider all of those things. They're going to make sure that we're aware. You don't want to be, there's limits on when you should be doing disruptions to habitats and lakes anyway. Turtles bury in the sediments and overwinter. You want to make sure you're doing this after they've emerged for the spring. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Any other questions?
I think Diane.
It's Bill. Bill's got one.
Oh, hey, Bill.
Do we have any sort of exposure depending on what the winter turns out to be like? Like if we get a bad winter, do things all of a sudden have to stop, or can they keep doing their magic while the weather
So
is crummy?
we would build this so that there's buffer time for weather. So like if we get, I don't know, a hurricane and we're doing this in August or something, right? We would build in extra time so that they would have to stop, cover everything, protect it, obviously, and then come back to restart it. It doesn't change, it would only change the timing. So it would change it from maybe 6 weeks to 8 weeks or 10 weeks, depending on how long the stoppage of work would happen. But I would not feel comfortable launching a dredge if we only had the 6-week window, right? I would leave some buffer just in case there was something to happen. I think that's just good practice in general to hedge your bets and to have a backup plan.
Yeah, the only thing I worry about at times is the unpredictability.
I don't
with
know
the
how I
weather
can
in this
ask a
area.
question. I can't get it to work.
I can hear you, Keith. Just
Oh.
1 second. Bill was wrapping up his thought, and then we'll jump to you.
Oh, all right. Yeah, I'm a neighbor on Spring Valley Road, and I followed your Zoom presentation. My concern is mitigation of the tree removal. Previously, a couple of years back, there was a logging operation between the parking lot and Wildflower Island, where you put in a whole bunch of trails, which compact the soil. There was no mitigation. Now you're going to dredge and move all the soil from the bottom of a lake up to a meadow, and removing humongous mature trees that may be in decline, but they are propagating seeds, which are very valuable because of the age of the trees. So after the dredging is done, just wondering what kind of mitigation you're going to do so that it doesn't just fill back in.
Yeah, so that the wetland restoration project we did in 2020 was that mitigation to keep the sediment from flowing back into the lake. So that has that catch basin I mentioned at the beginning. You're welcome to tour it. If you come to Teatown and you park in the main lot, you can actually see the catch basin right at the bottom of the hill there, and the piping and the hardscape, and those plants are going to settle that sediment before it reaches at the bottom of the swale, before it reaches the lake. So we already did that work. That's already finished. In terms of tree mitigation, so typically what is required when you go in front of the town is that it's a 1-for-1 with the tree replacement, and we will have plenty of opportunities to replant those trees, and probably more on the edges of this restored meadow. We've done tree removals for habitat improvement projects in the past, and we usually plant above and beyond what is required for mitigation from the town, because it's best ecological practice for us to have a diversity of species versus what is there now. In terms of the seeds, so right now most of those trees are black walnuts, and we do have a propagation garden where we're starting, and we've been pulling seeds from mature trees to propagate those for replantings in other areas. So that genetic diversity shouldn't be lost, because we're going to be putting those plants in new places that are coming from the seeds.
Oh, that's good to hear.
Mm-hmm.
The mitigation for the town of Yorktown is not 1-for-1. It's based on DBH.
Yeah, so I should have clarified that. So it's when we've done tree removals in the past, and it's the DBH of the tree that they require varies depending on the tree of the DBH you took down. So you're right, like there's a calculation for that, but we always exceed it, Keith. So I don't know the exact language in the Yorktown code, but we always do right by the ecology. I can assure you that, and I'm happy to share our planting plan with you when we get to that stage.
Oh yeah, no doubt, because I'm on the committee in Yorktown. So
oh, perfect, awesome. So you'll be seeing it ahead of time.
So I'll probably at some point meet you to take the tour and all that.
Yeah, absolutely. You can email me if you want to do a not a formal Yorktown, but if you're a neighbor too, you're always welcome to hike with us and see what we're doing.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anybody else? Bill, I don't know if you were following up with your thought, if you were finished, but. So you're muted, I think.
No, I just got unmuted by my partner.
You are now.
Good questions. No, I'm done.
Okay.
Agreed. I just wanted to point out that the trustees on the call don't have questions because you have presented this to us before, where we asked lots of questions.
But
Yeah,
I
and-
appreciate you being here to support Marguerite, for sure.
And I'll just add that again, just reiterate what I said at the top. The reason for this timing is we were very keen on having a public information session before we submitted for the permits to the various agencies that Dr. Danielle mentioned. But yeah, we're available. And if anybody has questions that come up later, please do reach out to us. You know, we're making every effort to be as thoughtful in all areas, both ecological and disruption to trail access and Teatown programs and everything else. So yes, this is by no means the end of the discussion, but I hope it's a really good foundation and provides the key kind of core information that we're going to be working with.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. If you have any follow-up questions, I'm going to toss my email in the chat. You're welcome to send me a message. Oops, that's the wrong, hang on. Don't click on that. I forgot the R. There we go. So that'll come directly to me, and I'm working with you know, contractors and planning this. And like I said, this has been a long, very methodical process. So if you have questions, it's likely they've been addressed already. And Tim also has his contact information there from Eco Assessments LLC. He's helping us with permitting. So feel free to email either of us.
I just want to say thank you because I think this was a very, very well done presentation and extremely informative. So I hope that a lot of people will take advantage of looking at it later.
Thanks everyone for joining us this afternoon.
John, I must say too, I'm just a hiker there, but you did a wonderful job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay,
you.
bye, everybody.